Hi, I'm Kelly DiMartino with the City of Fort Collins. The Fort Collins community is having a conversation about how we want to address pressing needs in some specific areas: street maintenance, police, fire, parks, and recreation. We're talking about whether to cut additional services or to add additional resources. And so for that conversation, we want to provide some additional context about each of those areas. I'm very pleased to have joining me today our Fire Chief, John Mulligan, and Captain Ron Sims. Thank you both for being here. I'd like to spend some time talking about Poudre Fire Authority and just providing Fort Collins residents with some additional information about what Poudre Fire Authority does and some of the long-term needs that you see, as well as those pressing immediate needs that your organization is facing. So John, I'm going to ask you to start out by just giving us a bit of an overview of how PFA is structured. You don't serve just Fort Collins, so talk a little bit about what the organization of Poudre Fire Authority does.
Well, the Fire Authority was founded in 1981. At that time, I was the fire chief in the city, and we worked with the fire district, and at that time, Chuck Willis was the fire chief in the fire district. And we both had issues regarding delivery of fire services to the community. The city was growing rapidly to the south, and we didn't have fire stations to serve the new areas. The fire district had built some fire stations in, for instance, right on Harmony Road a couple of years before, and the city had annexed right up to the edge of their stations. So we began conversations on how we could deliver better service to the whole region, and how the fact that, for instance, a fire station that was on Link Lane out off of Highway 14, when it was responding to a fire at the Foothills campus at CSU, would actually respond past 2 city fire stations on the way. And that was like a 10-mile response, and we had stations that were within a couple of miles of the campus. Those kind of things were really kind of silly. And so we began those conversations on how we could make a more effective department that would be more cost effective. And so as a result of that, we signed an intergovernmental agreement creating the Fire Authority in 1981. And we serve the city of Fort Collins. 80% of our funding comes from the city. 20% comes from the district, and the district goes up to the south border of the city of Wellington. It goes to the edge of the Loveland, Fort Collins Loveland Airport. It goes out east into some areas in Will County, and it actually goes up into past Horseshoe Rock in Redstone Canyon. And so the total area we serve is about 240 square miles, of which the city is about 55, I believe. And so we have 10 paid stations and 3 volunteer stations that serve that area. We have about 150 uniformed personnel and about 15 civilian personnel. Yeah. Our dispatching comes from the Poudre Communications Center, which is in the police building, and we work closely with many agencies in delivering emergency services. We work with the sheriff for wildland, and we have a responsibility of our own for wildland fires, and so we're geared up for that also. Clearly this is
a comprehensive approach that you guys have, a lot of partnerships in place, which is great. Talk a little bit, if you will, Ron, I'm going to ask you to talk a little bit about when John says emergency services, what that means. It's not, you know, fires in your name, but it's not just about fires, is it?
Right, Kelly. We respond to, we're basically an all hazards response group. And that involves everything from, like you said, fires, medical emergencies, hazardous material spills, auto accidents where there could be injuries or non-injury depending on the situation. Really any situation that we're called upon, specialized rescue up behind Horsetooth, those kind of things. If really the dispatcher gets a call and they don't know who to send, the fire department goes. So we really had to adapt through the years to be able to meet that need in the community. So people get kind of confused sometimes when the fire engine shows up for medicals or in any of the other cases, but it's very important for us to respond because any incident takes a lot of personnel. It's very labor-intensive occupation, whether you're providing medical aid or fires. So the more people you get on scene, the safer it is.
And about how many calls does PFA respond to in any given year or month?
We're about 14,000 a year now, up from about 10,000 10 years ago. So we've seen a steadily increasing number of calls. And of course, as that happens, it means that more and more units are tied up on calls during a shift. So that's some of the issues in terms of our staffing levels that we're interested in trying to deal with.
So let's talk about those staffing levels a little bit. Talk about how PFA compares to some of our surrounding neighbors or others in the country.
We're probably about 20% below the average of fire departments along the Front Range. Nationally, if you compare us against other cities of our size that are central cities, which we are, our staffing is about 50% of the national average. So we really are doing more with less, and the system as we've gone through time, it's difficult to maintain our level of service because the call numbers go up and the severity of the incidents goes up, and it puts a lot of pressure on our system.
So our staffing levels are low. How about our response times?
Our response time is really good. That's the positive story. Through the years, we've been able to position our fire stations primarily because of the authority in the best possible positions. Most of the stations have been built since the authority, and so we maximize their response areas. That was one of the ideas of having an authority, because we looked at the North Denver area, basically Westminster, Thornton, those communities in North Denver, and we saw when we studied the number of fire stations that they took that they were needing about 40% more stations than we needed, because each entity, because of how their boundaries were, didn't maximize the placements of stations, because each city was putting their stations to their best advantage. And so if you took a 50 square mile piece out of that, and you said if you did away with the boundaries, I could have positioned stations to have gotten the same response times and had 40% less. And that's a huge number in terms of millions and millions of dollars. And so we've been able to put our stations right where they need to be. We also place a lot of emphasis on quick response in terms of the firefighters get up and out very quickly, and that's to their credit. They're very committed to getting there. But we also are committed to not hurting anybody on the way. So we do put a lot of emphasis on safe driving.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. As a resident, I appreciate that. So again, it seems like we're doing very well with the amount of resources we have in terms of responding and getting to people when we need to, and yet we're still saying there's this gap, right? There's about $3.2 million a year in additional funding that's needed. Ron, I'm curious, from more that at the firefighter level, what does that mean, right? If we're already responding fairly quickly, what would additional resources be used for?
I think a clear-cut example of that would be one of our most pressing needs identified in our strategic planning process, which is South Battalion chiefs. When we say South Battalion, that's 3 personnel that act as supervisors or managers over what would be half of our system. The chief described, a very large system that was built out of the efficient model of the Poudre Fire Authority. In order to manage that right now, we have 1 battalion chief who manages those 10 stations, 12 captains underneath that person. And it really at the street level, what that's done is they're just not able to get with their individual captains as much as possible. They may be out visiting a station in the North District, let's say Station 12 up on Country Club Road, and a fire or an incident breaks out where you need a battalion chief on the south. They have to go all the way through town, and we're not meeting that 8-minute response time for a battalion chief on an incident. That means, like me as a first-in captain, somebody has to be in command, whether the battalion chief is there or not. So we have to, we have to be the combative commander. It's a very, very tough role. You have to set the whole scene up, allocate the resources coming in, and then you have to go in and fight the fire. And really what that's adding up to is it's becoming less safe for our community and for us as firefighters. So we really would like to see that, initially, that South Battalion get instituted so that we can provide a safer environment.
Right now, that time period, the scenario that Ron just mentioned, that could be up to 20 minutes for that battalion chief to get to the scene of an incident in the south part of our area. And so that's a significant time. What that really means, practically speaking, is when Ron is having to, from a safety and setup standpoint, manage the scene, it really takes the engine company that he's responsible for out of the firefighting business until more help comes in. And so it's really, you know, it kind of sounds like one of those management positions, but in reality it has a huge impact in our ability to get timely first attack on a fire. The other thing I think most people really think in terms of their first engine response. And there's a lot of reasons for that. That's an important element, that 4 minutes from the time we're notified until we get there. But there's another aspect to it. The National Fire Protection Association and actually several different federal agencies look to having 13 folks on scene before you really are doing full-scale fire attack. And so that means we're bringing engines from all over our system to fill that gap. And so that second engine and that third engine, how long it takes them to get there is also an important element, in, at least from a fire standpoint. And we really end up having to empty the community to provide enough people to adequately fight a working fire. And so that leaves a broad swath of Fort Collins and the surrounding area with empty stations during that period of time. And so that's an element we look at too. And in the strategic plan, we identified some of the shortcomings that we saw in the amount of both the amount of equipment as well as the number of people we had. And we actually developed a phased-in approach to improving the staffing so we'd be able to leave more engines in place rather than just have to empty the system whenever we had a working fire. So that's a long-term strategy we've had to try to fill the gap.
Which really ties into our second need, which is some of those outlying stations. They need a fourth person for the response because it takes longer for crews to get out there to help. And they also have secondary pieces of equipment that need to be driven at times. And we drop down to 2 people when that person goes out as opposed to having the 3 with the fourth person there. So.
And that was going to be my next question, is kind of when we talk about an engine that responds, how many people is that? And again, if we don't have someone else in charge other than the captain who's with that engine, does the whole team have to wait until someone else gets there? Or just tell us a little bit more about what that actually on the ground, what happens?
We start out with a 3-person engine company right now. But before we actually send people into a hazardous environment where we've got real fire and real flame, there's national requirements that we have a backup team available and prepared to support them should they get into trouble and basically need to be rescued. And that happens in the fire service quite often, kind of that buddy system. And so you have to have enough people on the outside to deal with the people that are on the inside. And so that's what, you know, takes more time. It's really not appropriate for people to go in without any backup. That's not a safe situation. So people start, the initial engine company will start preparing for entry. You know, they'll stretch out the hoses, they'll get everything in place, and then they're hoping and praying that next engine is right around the corner so they can get going. And if there's somebody's life is at risk, they're authorized to go in on their own. But that's kind of a scary situation to put people in, because if anything goes wrong, there's nobody there for them. So but those are the fire department has transitioned over the last 20 years in a lot of different ways. We're I think more influenced by federal and national safety standards now than we were 10 or 20 years ago in terms of requirements that these things be in place. And you know, if God forbid you hurt or kill a firefighter, the feds will come in with a major investigation to see why that happened and to see whether you followed all the appropriate rules. And so, you know, we really want to make sure, not just because the Fed's going to investigate, but because we're committed to firefighter safety, that we do it right.
Yeah, and I really think through the years we have done a fabulous job. We train very well. We have highly trained personnel. We have great procedures in place. We really efficiently use all the resources that we have. It's just really getting to that point, as the chief said, our call load has grown from 10,000 to 14,000, and part of our future needs, has to do with keeping us as safe as possible and the community. So,
you mentioned the firefighter per capita number. We're at about 0.88. Earlier in the PFA, our firefighter per capita was at 1, or too slight, like 1.05. So we've actually slipped over the last few years in terms of how many firefighters we have per capita.
So as we think about these needs that you're facing, then it sounds like a big piece of this is obviously personnel, right? You're needing
Yes.
more people. What are some of the other things that go into that $3.2 million need?
Well, primarily it's the South Battalion, and it's the ability to put 4 people at some of our outlying stations that are the ones that it takes the longest to get those additional crews in to support. So the ones that are right more on the edge of the city, there's the ones that it takes more time for engines to come in to support them. And they are also the stations that have multiple pieces of equipment. For instance, Station 10, which is across from Fort Collins High, they have hazardous materials truck there. And so there's 3 people there. They have the responsibility for running their fire engine, but if we have a hazmat spill, they then would take the fire truck and the hazmat unit to the scene and begin that operation as a hazmat team. So we also have that in wildland that have wildland rigs, and also tanker trucks to provide water in areas where there's not sufficient water. So we have a number of stations that have basically 2 pieces of equipment that have to be driven and staffed. And so we're focusing on those initially because those are our most pressing needs. There's a case to be made, and it was made in the strategic plan, that moving towards 4 people on all the engines. But right now, we've picked the highest priorities for that increase in staffing.
Okay. One of the questions, we get to do the CityWorks program where people have an opportunity to kind of see behind the scenes at some of the services. And one of the questions that occasionally comes up is, why does PFA respond to every emergency medical call in addition to an ambulance service? Can one of you talk a little bit about why we do that, the benefits of doing that, and maybe also the costs? Again, I think what the question is it an effective use of resources?
Well, I'll answer that because I probably know the cost bit.
All right. We'll let you answer the cost, and you talk about how many of those calls you go on and what it's like.
Yeah. The reason we respond is there's about double the number of fire stations as ambulance locations. And so historically, and it's not just in Fort Collins, throughout the nation, firefighters respond to medical emergencies, have for years and years and years and years. It's nothing new. A lot of departments run paramedics and paramedic ambulances out of their fire stations. So we don't. We have a cooperative relationship with the Poudre Valley Health System. They provide the ambulance service. We provide the first responder, EMT, and cardiac defibrillation. So we would come in if somebody had a heart attack and needed to be defibrillated. Our people are all trained to do that. And that's probably one of the most important things you can do in terms of a full arrest. So they would get there quicker on average. And then another thing that I think a lot of the public really doesn't realize is that if somebody is more seriously hurt and they're going to be transported, many times it takes several people in the back of the ambulance to provide the medical care necessary to keep someone viable till they get to the emergency room. And so if someone is doing CPR or is doing that work, that's done better with two people. And so we actually will send a firefighter to the hospital in the back of the ambulance to help the crew, because the ambulance crew has two people. One's driving and one's in the back, and they're by themselves, and many times they need more help than that. The other thing is on vehicles. When we run a lot of accidents, and we have the type of equipment that can get people out of vehicles, jaws of life, those kind of things that aid and assist in those kind of things. And the ambulance just doesn't carry that kind of equipment and doesn't have that kind of training. We did a study of the cost. Actually, we've done it several times, but for us, the real cost ends up being training and fuel, because our people are already there. I mean, we don't hire people just to do medical. They're doing everything, and so we're already paying that cost of having them on duty. The numbers are there primarily for the fire response, and so it's basically fuel and some training and some equipment, which compared to our total budget, I think at one time it was like less than 2% of the cost of our budget. And
sounds like greatly improved service to the community.
It's a value-added service to having fire protection, really. I mean, and the chief spoke about the partnership. We work really well with Poudre Valley Ambulance Service, and they provide a little bit higher level of care. But I think it's really comforting for the citizens to know, if I'm at Fire Station 3 right down the street and they call 911, we're there very quick. We're able to begin the process of the care. At the basic level, again, Chief spoke about defibrillation and cardiac care. Those are, in cardiac problems, they are very labor intensive if it goes to the worst scenario, where you're providing CPR. And it would be really detrimental to the community to have an ambulance have to call for a fire engine after the fact. I think the way the system works right now, it's really a model of efficiency in the community. And it's because of so many calls, again, it's getting stretched. So.
And again, that partnership, and you talked earlier on a little bit about the dispatching of that, and having all of the agencies work together seems like a really, again, just a good collaborative model.
It is.
All right. So as we think about, again, this conversation with the community and the pressing needs that are out there, what I'm hearing is both firefighter safety and community safety are the two priorities for your agency. True?
That's correct. And I wanted to mention something that I think that kind of supports some of those concepts. We just recently had a rating by the insurance industry of our fire capabilities. And previous to this rating, we had been rated a Class 3 fire department, and on a rating scale with the insurance industry, they rate you from number 1, which is the very best, to 10, which is the very worst. And so there were only several Class 3 departments in the state, so we were pretty happy with that. They re-rated us and rated us as a 4, and one of the major reasons for that is they didn't feel our staffing was adequate to maintain a level 3. And so when we got that information, we started looking at what that would mean in terms of insurance costs in the community. So we talked to people in both the industry, the rating agencies, to see if we could get a handle on it. And we were told that the impact will be about $3.5 million a year in increased insurance costs, both for the residential homeowner and the business owners, because of our downgrade in ratings. And so, you know, one of the advantages, I think, of improving our staffing would be for us to be able to move from a 4 to a 3 and maybe even to a 2, which would be an even bigger increase in insurance savings. So what it looks like, at least to me, is that for the amount of money that we're asking for, we would actually get more for the citizens in insurance savings than it'll cost, and they'll have the added benefit of having better service and a safer community. So I mean, I was actually really surprised that the savings in insurance were that much. But and we're continuing to look at that number. We're going to be working with a CSU business school to try to confirm as best we can those numbers.
Yeah, that seems like a significant amount.
Yeah, I was quite surprised.
Yeah. And just to be clear, again, because we're talking about the entire fire authority, not just within the Fort Collins city
Right.
limits, as we talk about additional resources and officers that are needed, would the city of Fort Collins be shouldering that entire responsibility for additional funding, or are you also looking at other sources from other places in the authority?
We're looking for, and have had conversations with our fire district board, and they seem to be on board as asking their citizens to increase their funding to an equal amount per capita as the city is, as well as we've asked the town of Tinmouth to help support us also. So those are, you know, we're looking at, since we all share in the burden of providing fire protection, ask them to contribute also. But all of the paid fire stations, with the exception of 2 are within the city, which kind of fits that ratio of 80-20, which is actually held for 30 years. So it's worked real well.
Amazingly, the call load has followed that for 30 years as well. 80% of the calls are generated really in the city and 20% in the district. I'm not sure how you manage that, Chief, but you've done a good job.
I would have never guessed it.
Very good planning on your part. Very good
Yes.
planning. All right. Well, as we wrap up our conversation today, Ron, any closing thoughts from you just on how this conversation impacts the community and you know why it matters to us as a community?
Well, I think I'd like to start off just with being thankful. I'm thankful for the opportunity to kind of have this dialogue with the community, because it's really been a long time coming, I think. We have done a fantastic job of planning, of the crews being professional, skillful. Chief spoke on how prompt we are. We continually strive to do the best we can and provide the best customer service. But really, we need to have this dialogue with the community, because from the outside looking in, I think the citizens probably don't understand the need. Don't understand that, you know, that we're getting stretched, and that as we get bigger and we run more calls, we may have multiple major incidents at one time within our district. And these are pieces that we need to have in place to be ready, to be ready to respond to those calls, because as we move forward into the future, we want to continue to provide that same level of service.
All right. Well, thank you very much for joining us today. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Kelly.
Chief Mulligan, any final thoughts from you and just closing thoughts for the community?
No, I just wanted to say again, as Ron said, that to really appreciate the opportunity to talk about our needs, and really I hope people understand, you know, that I think they have a first-class fire department. We just would like to keep that way.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Well, thank you both for the service you provide. That concludes this conversation. For more information about Resourcing Our Future, please go to scgov.com/resourcingourfuture.